Okay, so I'm not going to do a lot of moderating, and I've asked our panelists today to briefly discuss what they do, very briefly, but more in line to how it relates to the types of proposals that they receive that are specific to curatorial practice in nature, whether it's from the curator themselves or about a project that's curatorial based. And with that, you can put up the first set of slides for Helen. And I don't know, Helen, if you want to stand there, I don't know if that will help you advance, but I know you need to stand. Oh. Whichever you prefer. Sorry, it's a little awkward either way.
I'll stand.
Okay, great. So Helen Wexler's with the IMLS. How many in this room have received an IMLS grant? Great, great. So obviously the government approach is one that we wanted to add to this, the chorus of voices today. And I will leave it to you to begin.
Thank you, Sally. So, yeah, okay, so one more time. Hands for people who are familiar with IMLS. Okay, keep your hands up if you have applied for a grant. All right, keep your hands up if you've gotten it. Oh, pretty good percentage. Okay, so in a room of friends, that's good. So Leanne's comments were great. A lot of what she said applies directly to what you're going to be thinking about and doing if you apply for an IMLS grant. And but of course, there's there's all sorts of other issues when applying for federal money. So a little different stuff. So let me see. There we go. Okay, so of course, IMLS is funding all kinds of museums. We're funding science museums and children's museums and history museums and art museums and zoos and aquaria and natural history centers and botanical gardens and everything. So we love them all, and we like to talk to folks like you because it allows us to think about one discipline in one area and how the goals that IMLS has can link with what your goals and your missions and your strategic desires are. So it's a good thing. So I'm going to cut to the chase. This is pretty much everything in a nutshell on one slide. It is a description of the two primary grant programs that, if you are interested in IMLS funding, you'll likely stumble across. The first is Museums for America. This is our bread and butter program. It's the one that funds the stuff that is meeting the goals of your strategic plan. So just like Leanne said, you have to demonstrate that what you're doing links directly to your strategic plan and your strategic goals. It doesn't have to be hugely innovative or groundbreaking. It just has to do what you need to do in your community to get done what your institution does. On the other side, on sort of the other hand, we have the National Leadership Grant Program. That one does need to be innovative and have broad impact. And indeed, when I think about the differences, I think about the need statement. For Museums for America, you're saying, what's the need here in my institution and for my community that I'm serving? And on the National Leadership side, you're saying, what is a need in the museum field that this project can address, that is going to have an impact, that I'm going to bring together these partners that are going to help me figure out, what the best way for families to learn in contemporary art museums is. What is the big thing that I can deliver for the field that's going to advance? Both grant programs have three primary categories under which you can apply: learning experiences, community anchor, and collection stewardship. I'm going to get to those a little bit more in the next slide. Deadlines for 2014 are to December 2nd, 2013, so not so long from now. You can see the dollar amount you can apply for in each of those grant programs. There is a cost share required for each of those grant programs, so as Leanne said, in our budgets, you do have a cost share column, and you fill that in as you go along through your yearly budgets. They can be 1 to 3 years, so but you apply all at once. Just at the bottom, if you are at all familiar with some of the more specifics of IMLS grant programs, we've recently combined a bunch. So what used to be conservation project support, stuff for your collections, is now incorporated into Museums for America. What used to be professional development training is now incorporated into national leadership. I want to say, actually, before I go on, there's one other grant program called Sparks, which is going to be around again next year. It'll be our third year. And Sparks is our small grants, $25,000 grants with no match requirement, that are intended to let you experiment and take risk. And I think that you guys at this stage in the sort of trajectory of art museum curation are maybe at a point where you need a little freedom and a little risk taking and some ability to say, hey, let's try this and let's see if it works. And if it doesn't, that's okay. You've learned something there too. But the idea is to try to be innovative, to try to push an envelope, to share whatever it is, whether it's a fabulous success or a dismal failure, with your colleagues so that we all can benefit. So that's another grant program that's out there. All of this is on our website, so it's not secret stuff. You can find it or talk to us later. So the three grant categories I described relate directly to IMLS's three outward-looking strategic goals. So again, like Leanne said, when you're going to apply to a funder, be sure you know what their goals are. And our strategic plan is on our website. So reading through that, thinking about the language we use and what we're looking for museums to be doing in their communities is a good way for you to then be able to spin your project out for us. So for learning experiences, we are looking for, projects that put learners at the center and support engaging experiences in libraries and museums that prepare people to be full participants in their local communities and global society. For community anchors, it's more about serving as a gathering space, as a enhanced civic engagement, cultural opportunities, and economic vitality. Again, I think of it as sort of identifying a need in the community that your institution has assets and skills and abilities to meet. So it's not, we have these works and we want to do this exhibit for everybody, which is fine. It's more, look at the need over there. What can our assets, what can we do with our programming and our collections that can help address that issue of illiteracy or whatever it is that the community has. And finally is sort of the core one that I don't need to explain too much, collection stewardship. So it's care of collections, making things available either through technology or other means, caring for them, preserving them. So I put together, I'll quickly roll through these examples of a couple of recent grants. These are all from the 2012 fiscal year grants that went to art museums from what I could determine were slightly curatorial topics. And I've found these on our website by searching awarded grants. So we have on the right side a little feature that says search awarded grants. You can do it by grant category, by year, by topic. You can put in keyword searches. You can put in art. You can do whatever and come up with some examples of the kinds of things that have been funded. So this is an exhibit. It's got accompanying catalog and educational programming, a retrospective. So that was funded by IMLS last year. This one in Denver, and hey, if anybody's from any of these institutions, say hello. I hope everything's going well. Denver Art Museum is working on this on Thread, which is coinciding with the reinstallation of a gallery in the museum. And one of the things they're doing is testing these three types of in-gallery methods of engaging adult visitors. So that's another piece, I think, when you're thinking about IMLS grants, thinking about how you can marry both, if it's exhibit work with programming work, with work for the public, it's going to be probably more engaging for the reviewers. This one I put under collection stewardship. It is looking at paper, works on paper and arts and crafts, Art Deco, Art Nouveau, at the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts, in order, as a result of a conservation survey. And I want to stress that all collections care projects have to be based on some kind of survey with priorities setting, so that it's not just a willy-nilly, let's work on this object because we like it. And then they'll go in the gallery alongside the collections. Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum was working on tapestries that were also intended for reinstallation of their tapestry room. So here's a beautiful picture of the tapestry room. That's all I have for examples. But so as far as the pieces of the, how am I doing on time? Am I going? Okay. As far as the pieces of the application, many of them are parallel, similar to, again, what Leanne said. In the government world, you're going to apply online. Everything is online. You have to come through a portal called grants.gov. There's going to be, a standard form for 24S, which is the application for federal assistance. Other forms, an abstract. But here's the narrative. And it's exactly what you've heard about. I mean, we want to know, what are you going to do for whom, for what outcome, who's your audience, that kind of thing, who's going to benefit. And that's your first section. Then you go on to describe your work plan. How are you going to do it? Who's going to do it? How are you going to have resources associated with the activities? How are you going to track your progress? And how are you going to adjust if things don't go right? Very much these days, we don't want to see you get to the end of your project and say, well, we came up with this plan, but it doesn't really work. We want to know, we measured and we found out halfway through that it wasn't working. So we made this adjustment, and hey, now we have something good to show for it. That's very much a part of current grant writing, to build that into the project. And then your results. So we really want to know what you intend to find out, what those outcomes are going to be, how you're going to get the word out, how you're going to sustain that benefit. And all this is on our website. So the timeline for 2014. Think about your project ideas. Call us. We can't read draft proposals, but we are happy to talk to you on the phone or have a meeting if you're in Washington. All of the program officers at IMLS are very willing to have conversations, and we like doing it. It's fun. So never hesitate to call us. As I said, one of the more arduous parts of applying for federal assistance is all the sort of registrations and web portals that you have to get through, and it can be complicated. You have to have your DUNS number. Most large art museums do. You have to be registered on sam.gov, which used to be ccr.gov. And if you had a CCR registration, it has to be migrated to SAM, and all of this probably the development office will do, but if you're at a small place where you're doing everything, do look at it right away. And be registered on grants.gov so you can get everything uploaded in time. And do it all really early. Don't wait for all this stuff till the end, because if there are problems, they don't get fixed that day. So you miss the deadline and you're out of luck, and it's really sad. And we see that a lot. So early summer, late summer, early fall, you'll see the guidelines for these grant programs posted on our website. And that's when all the details will come out. The 2013 guidelines are still up, and I can guarantee you that the 14 ones are going to be very, very similar. So if you have any desire to start thinking about it now, go get those guidelines and take a peek, and it won't at all hurt you to start crafting things using those sets of guidelines. December 2nd is the deadline. Don't be late. And that's it.
Thank you, Helen.
Yeah.
Okay. Now I am going to ask Paula Marincola to present from the Pew Center for Arts and Heritage, which is Philadelphia-based and has a very innovative way of funding the community in Philadelphia.
Hi. I know there's at least 3 people in the room who know something about the center, but I assumed coming here that most of you would not. So I'm going to do a very super quick introduction, because we are not your usual funder. So the Pew Center for Arts and Heritage is a multidisciplinary grant maker. We do fund in the immediate 5-county Philadelphia area. We're an arm of the Pew Charitable Trust, which is our sole funder. While we fund in 7 areas, and you can see them exploded on our logo, we do share a common purpose, which is to support artists and cultural organizations whose work is characterized by what we like to say is excellence, imagination, and courage. Those are the values that we espouse, and we like that work to reach and engage, bad, buzzword, targeted audiences that are both broad and diverse. And those audiences can be small, and they can be large, and they can be everything in between. We take a pretty nuanced approach to thinking about audience. I'll say more about that in a minute. In doing our work, the center invests about $8 million annually in culture, and we just went through a restructuring announced last month that's going to allow us to up that investment to $10 million in the Philadelphia area. So it's a substantial investment that we make in culture in our community. The center, when I said we're not your usual grant maker, the center has a dual identity and purpose, so that in addition to our grant making, we also function as a hub for research and knowledge sharing on issues that are critical to artistic expression, cultural interpretation, and public audience engagement. That means that we do a lot of convening and that we organize a range of activities for our constituents that include symposia, lectures, reading groups, master classes, trips, and workshops. And all of these events bring leading figures in the fields that we fund to the center to engage in various ways and in various forms of dialogue with our area practitioners. I don't know if you were all at the morning session. I understand Kathy McLean and Nina Simon were there. They've recently been in Philadelphia to talk with us on a few occasions about audience engagement practices, and it's always a lively conversation. The center also commissions and publishes scholarship and research on issues that grow directly out of our experience funding cultural practice. Some of you may be familiar with the anthology, What Makes a Great Exhibition, or Curating Now, which is the proceedings from a symposium I co-organized with Rob Storr in 2000. We're about to publish a little pocketbook called Pigeons on the Grass, Alas, Contemporary Curators Talk About the Field, which is an homage to Gertrude Stein, but it's also really interesting thinking on the part of a pretty broad range of young, old, and in-between curators from a lot of different places on what it means, what are the issues that are really critical to curatorial practice. Could I have the next slide? So we have through lines that we have articulated within our center that connect all of our work as both funder and convener. And these through lines, the first 2 on the white side kind of speak to our agenda as a grant maker, and the second to our agenda as a kind of think tank or hub. And they feed and inform each other. It's really important to us that all of these activities are going on at the center. We think they make us better grant maker and more responsive to the actual conditions of practice. With specific regard to the visual arts, we make project grants for both the planning and implementation of public exhibitions. The grants range from $25K for planning to up to $250,000 for full implementation. That is soon going to be raised to, the maximum grant is soon going to be raised to $300,000, which is a nice chunk of change. We add in a percentage on top of that project money for overhead. It's 10% now, it's going to go up to 20% because we know that there are general operating and organizational costs to managing a project, and we like to recognize that without taking money away from the direct costs of the project. Our grants are adjudicated by peer review. We bring experts from around the country, outside our region, but around the country, because we want to avoid conflict of interest. We want to ensure the integrity of our process, and they determine our grants. We have a pretty rigorous selection process with very specific criteria. We're all digital. We went digital a few years ago, and it's actually been great, although we fought it really bitterly. We did. It's like, no one will use this. We have a template form as an application, and we ask very specific, extensive, and substantive questions that require a lot of work and thinking to answer. But we think, we're a high-risk, high-reward grant maker in that we're giving you a lot of money to do your work. While our geographic focus is regional, the projects we support are international in scope. Recent projects include funding for a new film by Tacita Dean, the Philadelphia Museum of Art's multidisciplinary Dancing Around the Bride, which was the background slide with our logo, and an upcoming major exhibition for Jason Rhodes at the Institute of Contemporary Art, curated by Ingrid Schaffner. So if you go on our website, you can find a full history of our funding in visual arts and in all of the other program areas that we fund, and you'll see that we've funded a lot of commissions. One of the advantages of a regional focus is that we can be very hands-on with our applicants. And because we fund exhibitions, we're de facto funding curatorial work. And we spend a lot of time with our curators, both throughout the application process and within the framework of the capacity building work that we do. We're curator-centric, I like to say. In terms of capacity building, while we fund regionally, we hold our applicants to a field-wide standard. And so we try to help in helping them meet that bar, which is set pretty high. So we do curatorial roundtables. We've been doing them for years and years, where we bring leading curators, young, old, from around the world to talk to our constituents about issues that are critical to curatorial work. We just had Paul Schimmel and Helen Molesworth in to talk about curating the 80s. We give out individual travel grants, and we also take our curators on trips around the world. We know how important traveling is. We also know that most museums don't have enough money for their curators to be able to get out. So we try to help them get out of town. And we also organize and work curatorial intensive. We've worked in the last few years with Independent Curators International, Kate Fowle, who's actually moved on. And they are long-term workshops over 6 to 9 months that engage a specific curatorial issue or theme. So we do a lot to help our curators really develop their practice. In terms of the actual grants process, we have multiple touch points, and we give a lot of feedback throughout the process, from the early stages of conceiving a project. Leanne is absolutely right. If it's not a fit, don't twist yourself into a total pretzel, because it just never works. So we'll often be approached with an idea, and we'll say, that's a really great idea, because there are a lot of really good ideas, but it's not consistent with our goals and priorities and our criteria. So we don't want you to waste your time on that with us. You might find another funder for it. So we're hands-on from the beginning, through the LOI stage, through the application, and even in its aftermath. We don't determine the grants, the panel does, but we have a lot of experience among our staff with this process. And so we think our job is to do what we can to help every applicant be as competitive as possible. So put their best foot forward. And we also provide written, substantive, critical comments, feedback on request. We won't give it to you if you don't want it, but we do provide it for all of the applicants, even the ones that are given the grants if they ask for it. And I like doing it in written form, although it's hard and you really have to craft it, because it's hard to hear criticism when you're feeling the sting of rejection. I know this personally. And so if you have a little time to kind of think about it, then you can go back to the letter and look at it, you might find it's really, really helpful. The most common mistakes that curators and their organizations make in engaging with us is they don't pay close enough attention to our goals and priorities. They assume, and Leanne talked about this, I'm just going to reinforce what she said, that their project is great and should be funded. I'm entitled. Some unsuccessful curators don't listen to the feedback we are giving them when we're talking to them about their application, or they ignore it completely. They just think, oh, yeah, we're going to get funded. So the other mistake, and it's a corollary of the first one, is assuming that your values are transparent to others and that everyone will understand your specific professional vocabulary and the thinking behind your project. We're a group of ex-practitioners, and we bring your peers to adjudicate the grants. Still, people overuse jargon. And so I would say that successful curators at the center are those who are good translators and accessible writers. And, you know, they're the reverse of the unsuccessful ones. They pay attention to the strategic goals and priorities of the center. They think carefully about what projects might be a good fit for us. And then they work through the application creatively, trying to be imaginative and thoughtful with every aspect. Because we really look at every aspect. It's not just the curatorial thesis. It's not just the artist. It's the catalog. It's the educational program. It's your audience engagement tactics. So successful applicants also understand who the audience is for their project. They can articulate that, and they understand how they might meet and engage them. So they're, you know, everything is for somebody. Nothing is, every project is about something, and it's for somebody. And that somebody, even if it's the field, you need to tell us that you know who it is, and that you are going to do what makes sense to reach those people and engage them in your work. Finally, the most successful applicants with us time and time again are not afraid to be honest with us. They let us into their process, they admit to their problems and mistakes, and they allow us to help them throughout the life of the project. And we keep track of our projects. We don't, you know, it's not like here's the grant, we'll see you later. We check in, we do check-ins on a regular basis. And so we're learning from you, from our applicants all the time as they're learning from their work. And we, you know, funders live a really vicarious existence. You know, that we have to get our thrills from your success, and your success is our success. I don't know if you think about it that way. And funders feel a great sense of ownership about the projects that they fund. So Leanne's tip to tell people about good things that are happening with your project, your funder, we love to hear it. The center's funding priorities have stayed constant, and they'll continue to stay constant. Pew's a strategic philanthropy, and our work at the center is in service of realizing their strategy. So we're committed to enriching the cultural life of the community, and reaching a number of people with great ideas, and raising the visibility of Philadelphia as a dynamic cultural center. As I said in the beginning, we're looking to fund excellence, and it's a characteristic for us that is always looked at within the context of an organization's history and mission. We don't expect a community arts center to be an encyclopedic art museum, or vice versa, although that might be interesting. So we're looking for excellence in the way that I'm talking about it, imagination and courage, through exhibitions that in some very important and significant way go beyond business as usual for the applicant. Business as usual for us, our interest in pushing organizations to go beyond business as usual, I think, is pretty specific to the center. We're talking, when we say that, mainly about a conceptual stretch, not so much an issue of scale and logistics, and a re-examination of programmatic assumptions in formulating a proposal. We look for a curator and an organization to stretch themselves. We try to resist complacency. We're interested in scholarship. We pay a lot of attention to the catalogs that we fund. We're interested in audience. We do like metrics. Everybody likes numbers, but we realize they don't by any means tell the whole story. And I think our attention to audience identification and engagement has proven challenging for a lot of curators of visual art, because we're asking them to really think about audience in a nuanced way and not just give lip service to the word or ignore the issue entirely. So finally, in terms of thinking about how you might work with a development department in writing a proposal, I would just say that you should insinuate yourself into the process all the time. We don't like talking to development officers at the center. We want to talk to the curators. We want to talk to the programmers. We want to talk to the people with the ideas who have a lot to say, a lot of content to share. And if you do insinuate yourself into the development department, I think trying to ensure that the proposal has a real voice, that every aspect of it is comprehensively considered, and that boilerplate and repetition are kept to a minimum. So applications in which it's clear we're hearing from a curator directly, that someone has actually paid attention to the questions and answered them thoughtfully and not just generically, have always done really well with us. And, you know, the budget should be real. What Leanne said about people realizing, you turn to the budget and you know right away if an applicant knows what they're doing or not. It's right there in black and white. So be real with your numbers, be thoughtful about it, and make sure the numbers match the narrative. And then try to read the application before it leaves the development department again, if possible. I'm sorry, are there any development officers in the room? I love you, and you have a thankless and really important task, but for us, we want to hear from the curator directly. So that's a kind of nutshell of the center. I could really go on and on, but it's time for other people to talk. So I'm happy to answer questions later. Thanks.
Thank you, Paula. Yeah, we can all sit here because I think that's the end of the images. I know for those of you who have ever worked in Philadelphia or who may know colleagues who work in Philadelphia that Pew is such an important funder, not just for the fact that they support so much of the arts in Philadelphia, but because of their innovative approach to the way that they fund projects. So I'm really happy to have Paula on this panel, and I look forward to having her talk a little bit more about how that might translate outside of Philadelphia in the sense that some of the questions that they ask are truly interesting, different ways to get at a proposal. And with that, I'm going to introduce Carrie Hazlitt, who many of you may know from the Tara Foundation for American Art. And Tara has funded this conference before, and we are so grateful to Tara for their support. And I know for many of the curators in the room may have received support from Tara as well. So we're delighted to have Carrie here to talk about support there.
Yeah, so the Tara Foundation for American Art is exclusively devoted to the visual arts, and we look at American art that was made before 1980. And our general mission is to advance study and appreciation of American art worldwide. So that's kind of a big task. We fund exhibitions and academic programs around the world, and we fund K through 12 programs and public programs in Chicago, where we have a civic mission. That's where our headquarters is. So Sally, I'm kind of the pragmatist here. Sally gave us a list of questions, and I'm going to answer them. So that's basically how I organized my talk. So one of the questions was, how do you think a curator should work with their development department in writing a proposal? And one suggestion is to start talking to your development department very early in the process. It can take them quite a while to identify good funding possibilities, but also the grant cycle is often very long. So ours is about 8 months long from the time you send in your first letter till you find out. And in fact, we actually ask for proposals 18 months before the show opens at its first venue, because the only way we're known is through credit in the catalog and in marketing materials. So if we can't be in that, it's less appealing to us. Second thing I would suggest is that you personally write certain sections yourself of the proposal, particularly if there are questions like, how does this exhibition contribute to scholarship? And that's because few people beyond the curators can speak as passionately and with as much complexity. So I would definitely suggest that you help with that, also with the executive summary. The other thing is, if a development officer asks for help with answers to foundation's questions, like follow-up questions, or they need follow-up materials, it's good to respond immediately. What I find is a lot of last-minute questions come in from our board or from our outside panel of reviewers, and in order to make a case for your project, I have to have answers. So the development people cannot answer the questions many times. So that's very helpful to your case. In terms of how the Tara Foundation interacts with curators, that is a huge part of our job, since we give about $3.5 million a year for exhibitions. Many times curators come to our offices in person. Sometimes they'll come alone. Sometimes they'll come with their director. Sometimes they'll come with a development officer. Any of it works. And then more often it's on the phone. And frequently curators will be maybe the first person. Like if your museum knows the foundation has worked with us, then the first person to tell us about the exhibition is usually the curator. They'll give us a call and say, hey, I'm working on this. I'm thinking about this timing. Do you think this fits your goals? So that leads to the next question from Sally, which is, what do curators who succeed in getting funding do well? And as Leanne mentioned, every organization is completely different. That's from what I mean, development people know way more than me about this because all I can speak about is the Terra Foundation. That's, the only foundation I've ever worked at. So what I'm going to tell you applies to us and it may not anywhere else. But one thing is that they contact the program officer before the letter of inquiry is sent. And the letter of inquiry is the first step in the grant proposal process where you outline what the project is, when it's happening, and how much money you're going to ask for. So basically, we get these letters and then we decide which proposals we're going to invite. So if I know more than that's on that page, if you've told me about your show and gotten me all jazzed about it, it helps me explain to the other people on that committee, oh yeah, what they really meant was X or something like that. The other thing that people who submit successful grants do is they read our guidelines before they reach out to us, mainly to understand what the foundation's mission is. And this is really key because what gets us excited about a project is not just how exciting your project is, because many of them are super exciting, but what gets us excited is how well it fits our mission. So it's really important to understand that. I'm sure you all know this, but foundations are entities that are trying to accomplish something to benefit a charitable cause. So our mission is all about internationalizing the field of American art, particularly pre-1980 American art. So this is not exactly feeding the hungry or eradicating a disease, but it attempts to provide educational opportunities for people outside the U.S. to engage with and understand American art. And it also seeks to complicate the dialogue about American art within American institutions by asking that projects look at American art through some kind of cross-cultural lens and thereby enrich the field. So the other thing successful grant proposals have is that they are well thought out and well articulated with their essayists, their major programs, and their loans lined up. Also, they need a very carefully planned, legible budget. Some budgets. We have a format, but it's like a work of fiction. I don't know what I'm looking at. But we have to understand, if we're presenting it to somebody, we have to be able to explain to other people what we're looking at. It's also useful to tailor the proposal language to the reader's or reviewer's level of knowledge, if you can find this information out. Sometimes it's hard to find it, but for instance, our readers they rotate, they're anonymous, and they're people in the field. They're curators, they're academics. So we prefer proposals that are scholarly. But if you're applying through a corporate marketing department, you're not gonna wanna do that. Okay, the next question is, what common mistakes do curators make in engaging you and your organization? I would say that actually curators are excellent. There are very few issues with curators. I think we've had a couple of times where when I've gone back to ask questions of a curator, they've been kind of contemptuous. It's a little bit, that's not good, so don't be contemptuous. They sometimes don't provide follow-up materials in a forthcoming manner or in a full manner. That can be harmful to the project. Also, sometimes they don't know what we fund, so that's kind of an awkward conversation sometimes for them and for us. And then the other thing is sometimes we get really unrealistic checklists. We're going to have 40 Jackson Pollocks and you're a museum this big. So it's good to be real. And then the last question is, what are the foundation's funding priorities now and for the near future? And I've explained kind of what we do already. One thing is we have put a lot of attention into Western Europe, where we have an office and had a museum for a long time, and we're going to continue to do that. But we are actively branching out in terms of setting up academic programs and sending exhibitions to China and other parts of Asia, but particularly China and to South America. So if any of you have projects that are traveling, that would be of great interest to us. The other thing is we have been working slowly to develop a database of contacts internationally, because what we hear a lot from curators in the US, particularly American art curators, is that they don't know a lot of contacts internationally. So if you're looking for international contacts or venues, sometimes we can make some good suggestions. My last comment would be that at the Terra Foundation, we very much welcome meeting and talking with you, developing relationships with you. Sometimes we can even be of help to your project in the thinking stage, not as a you need to do it this way, but you could do it this way, or I've seen other places do it this way. So please keep in touch, by phone or email or in person. So, thank you.
And last, James Bewley from the Warhol Foundation. How many in this room have either written a proposal or received funding from the Warhol Foundation? Great.
Good. Right.
Higher than I thought.
Me too. I think our numbers are, but I appreciate how linear that was. That would have made a good proposal. This is just going to be a bunch of words that sort of address the questions without going down. So we're an artist foundation. I think that's something key to know about us, because that's what we look for in every proposal, is the benefit to the artists above almost anything else. We're not big on metrics. We don't so much care about the budget. And but if you're providing an opportunity to an artist, whether it's emerging, mid-career, dead, that takes a little more work. But as long as you're approving that, then that's a good match for us. We're interested in new scholarship in terms of the writing of the catalog, for the exhibition, also if there's public programs and all that. But really, one of the key points, and this especially with a dead artist, but with anybody, if you're giving an artist a second look, or it might be a retrospective, demonstrate the influence of that artist on a contemporary generation of artists, and how that connects to the present moment is something that is often missing with some of the proposals that we get. We have 2 deadlines per year, March 1st and September 1st, and our application is a 3-page letter. That's it, plus the budget. Our average grant is $60,000 to $80,000. We're a national funder. A lot of the exhibitions, though, I would say the high end would be about $100,000 or so. Our role at the foundation as program officers is to put recommendations before the board. We don't have a panel review process or anything like that. We go out on the site visits, we meet with you, we write the things up, we present it to the board. That means that we have to have total confidence in the curatorial vision that you're presenting and the organization, so that we can really stand behind what we're putting forward. And I think something just important to remember is that we want to give the money out. We don't need to hold on to it. So we want to provide artists with opportunities and curators with opportunities. So that's what we're there for. We also like to help fund things that are tough for organizations to raise money for. If you have 2 projects and you can seek funding for one and you have an identified source, we'd prefer to be the one that might be more challenging for you, whether that's due to geography or freedom of expression issues or content, any of that kind of thing. There's 2 areas that are specifically they're geared towards curators, so I thought I'd touch on those in terms of the programs that we offer. The first one is a curatorial research fellowship, which has been available for the past 5 or 6 years, and there's not a lot of applications that come in through that call, so it's a good opportunity for you to do that. If you have a project that is 2 years out or so, this is an opportunity to travel and really do research. And unlike the other program area that I'll talk about with exhibition support, in this one we're specifically looking for there to be a little mystery left within it. We don't want it to be that you're doing a show of an artist's work of a 5-year span where he only painted submarines, and you're going to go to the artist studio and pick out those works, or the collector's works and pick out those submarine paintings, and there you go. That's like very clearly implementation money. But if you want to go investigate artist collectives in Southeast Asia and their connections to mystic cults in Los Angeles, and you need to travel to both of those places, and you're not exactly sure what's going to come out of it, but you're going to convene some artists, some experts, and try and unravel whatever the mystery is there. It doesn't need to end up in an exhibition or a catalog, but it does require that you're affiliated with an institution. So getting that affiliation might mean that they think there's something that's going to come out of it. It's always nice if there is a public presentation that goes along with it. Those grants are up to about $50,000. The budget in that case we do pay attention to a little more closely, because that's where are you traveling, who are you going to meet, what are the things that you're investigating there, what's this cost for a symposium, that kind of thing. And that just requires an additional letter from the institution saying that they support this project and they've signed on for it. It is good just to reiterate that those are about 2 years out. Sometimes we get projects that are a little too close. And it doesn't mean that we're always going to fund the exhibition. In theory, those two program streams are not competing with each other, so you could bring an exhibition for something else, or your institution could bring an institution for an exhibition, a proposal for another exhibition, and you could also bring a curatorial research grant proposal to us at the same time. It's the same pool of money, so while we say it's not in competition, it is.
Sort of is.
That might change going forward, but it is just a austerity. But what I wanted to say is that we don't always support the exhibition or the catalog or whatever grows out of that curatorial research. Sometimes we decide that we've funded it at the appropriate moment. So you're welcome to bring the exhibition to us after you've done the research, and sometimes we will fund it, and great, but it's not a guarantee with that, although it's great if it works out. It's always great when things work out. Exhibition support. When you're coming to us with that, it's the same 3-page letter. We're looking for major exhibitions that are really giving an artist a significant opportunity. So if they're commissioning new works, or if this is their first retrospective, if it's the first in-depth opportunity for them with a first catalog, all those kind of things are compelling reasons to support. And if it's a slighter project by an artist, we might be inclined to hold off, knowing that there might be a bigger retrospective coming down the road that might be by a larger institution. If you're at a small place, sometimes that does factor into it. But what I wanted to go through is just a bunch of the tips kind of stuff, and some of this will impact both areas. Most of this is specific to exhibition program when you're coming to us, and specifically for the curators, you need to write it. I think I want to reiterate what others have said, but I think you need to be involved. It's a 3-page letter. You can do it. If you can't, don't do it. But you need to explain why you're doing it and why these artists and why this moment is important, and do a little research. Make sure that we, as a foundation, have not supported this artist recently. There's a lot of artists, and we support nationally, internationally, and we want to be able to support as many artists as we can. So if you're bringing a project that we just funded someplace else, it's not going to go, and it'll just be. We'll in fact probably contact you at that point and say that this won't fly. If you're going to bring us a proposal, make an appointment beforehand. Again, not the development director, since they're not here. Meetings we don't like. Development directors, and especially if they just happen to be in town who want to establish a relationship. We talked about relationship buildings. We don't want that relationship. That's okay. We're just not interested. But the director and the curator, that's who we want to meet with. We don't need to check in all the time. If we've already been supported, great, good. We don't need to. There's a lot of art fairs, and people like to come to town, and it's great, because we're here in New York. But if you have a proposal before us and we're sort of considering it, yes, we want to meet with you then. If you know you're going to bring a proposal to us, yes, come in, because we need to have that conversation and understand. Most importantly, though, is us going to your institution and understanding how your institution works in your area and being able to imagine the exhibition happening in that space that you're in. We rarely ever fund something that at an institution that we have not traveled to. It's a little different with curatorial research, because it can do with a conversation or a phone call, but it's still important for us to see it. If you're going to leave your job, tell us. It happens a lot. There's a lot of movement. So if you have a proposal before us and you know you're going to take something within 6 months, just let us know. We're happy for you. But we need to know that if it's not going to happen at that place. If your organization is building a new building where the exhibition is going to be, wait till the building is up before coming to us, because we need to be able to understand, again, how this is going to function. It might not be that exhibition, so you bring another one to us. If this is a new series, this sort of touches on something that has also been said. And because sometimes we support a project series over 2 years. We'll give program support to a mid-sized to large institution. There's some museums like Aspen Museum or some, where we'll fund over multiple years. And if you're going to bring something like that, make sure it's happening. Don't say what you will like to do and would do if you could do it. Make sure that whatever you have going is going and up and running, because then you can talk about it in real terms. So we're not reading just a dream list, but really this is how this project functions, and you can bring some experience to the proposal. It'll just make it better all around. In some cases, in all cases, we want to make sure that it's the best opportunity, which means if you have traveling details, we want to know those. For the catalog, let us know who's writing for it, what they're writing about, and again, if that's might be where most often you're making the case for that connection to contemporary practicing artists of the moment. So be sure that that's called out. Group shows, that is a silly note. Group shows are hard. Yes, they are. They're increasing. I put this down just because it's been the last couple of rounds. We've had it's a difficult thing for curators to explain. And I know that it takes little faith on our part, but I would say it takes some clarity on your part. So anyway, give it some thought. That can be a tough case to make. And again, we're going to look at the opportunities for the artists. What are they getting out of being in this particular context? And this is maybe also repetitive, but if the case is hard for you to make to us, if you're having difficulty finding the connection point, it's probably going to be tough for us to make the case that it's right for our foundation. So if it's wrong, don't do it. One thing I wanted to add was tone. When you're talking about narrative, there's no development directors here, so I can say this. But we got one at some point that was like, I'm sitting on my beach house, looking out over the water and thinking about Warhol and how he would have felt. Just keep it an institutional voice, a professional voice. It gets too casual, it gets too weird. That we want to just get to it and be anyway. The budget, we tend not to be more than 20% of an overall project. We don't want to be the only funder. So that's a good just number to keep in mind, that if you have a $100,000 project, that might be on the low end for us in terms of where our funding tends to be. So you want to do a little bit of research there to see if you're coming in with a project that's the appropriate scale. If all of your exhibition budgets are quite small and they're $40,000 or something, or smaller than that, that's when it might make sense to come to us with program support over multiple years, and then you can talk about a series or something. But if it's a significant exhibition, then you should be okay. Our website does have the history. WarholFoundation.org has a map of recently awarded grants, so you can click on your state and go back and see who else has been funded in your region. The search function is a little wild, but you'll get used to it. But it does have a map, and it can be more, maybe a little easier than the highlighter 990 path. Don't mention Warhol. That's specific to us, probably. But we don't fund Warhol projects. We don't try to think, what would Andy do? It's always, it just makes you cringe when you read that final sentence about, and in the spirit of Warhol. Nope. The thing about the sort of audience engagement business, and that is, I said we're looking for the benefit to the artist. And sometimes we get projects that might be, we do need a compelling reason why to support this right now. But sometimes that's couched within a sort of anniversary season or an anniversary celebration of some kind. And then there's also the whole creative placemaking business. And both of those tend to, I think, get into terrain where you're talking about the benefit to the community, benefit to an audience, benefit to the institution. And we want to know that it's a benefit to the artists first and foremost. So that other stuff is not for our foundation. It's fine that it gets supported, but if you're really bringing to us something that has a lot of that audience engagement stuff, it really needs to be coming from a true, from an artist, it needs to be artist-led, and it needs to be clear that it's an extension of their practice, and this expands their practice or allows them to do something that they couldn't ordinarily do. We did support the feast, the radical hospitality at the Smart Museum, and I think that's an example of where there's a movement of people, getting together and having dinner and then voting on things, or, having artist-led meals, and there's a history to that which was revealed through this exhibition that allowed for some scholarship to come to it and to sort of capture a moment and give it some context, and that's the kind of way that we could support that. But all the other things starts to become very hard for us to evaluate and not really in line with what we support. So that's
Thank
where I
you.
would leave it.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Leanne to come back on stage, and actually we'll just open this up to questions. All right, who has a question? Yes.
Just more general, if you could give some examples of what kinds of successful proposals have been received for travel research.
So I'm going to make this for the recording because I'm not sure if that showed up, but this is a question specific to travel research.
We recently supported a curator at SF MoMA, the project called 6 Lines of Flight, where she was interested in and one of a few that have come in the last 4 years, maybe specifically looking at collective activity and artist collectives. So that one traveled through Eastern Europe and Asia, I think a little bit of Latin America as well, and then presented that within that show at SF MoMA. And that was a case where we did support both the exhibition and the research. There's been a number of projects that are sort of like that, which are a little bit field building and trying to bring some of that activity here. Others have been pretty, there's one currently happening now that's looking at the history of Native American artists in New York and their relationship to abstract expressionism, and that's going to culminate in an exhibition down the line. So it can be, it's a range of things in that, but those are all also listed on the website. And I should say that the things that we write to present to the board are also the texts that are on the website, somewhat embarrassingly, but they're there. So that's what ends up happening from the proposal. That's what we take from the proposal. So.
You had a question?
Yeah, I wanted to follow up on that question because it occurred to me that when you began speaking about the individual travel grants, one of the things that you said was these don't always wind up being exhibitions. Sometimes they begin in a more kind of speculative place.
Yeah.
And as someone who's at a relatively small museum and for whom a grant like that would be very attractive, I wonder to what extent you ask curators and institutions to develop work plans that pull curators out of the everyday work of acquisition committees and exhibition committees and that kind of thing. To what extent is that part of your process?
Well, we think about that in terms of it. We want there to be greater scholarship and greater opportunity to travel and to take time to do that. We try and I'm not sure how to figure it into the process of it. I mean, we don't. It's based on the strength of the idea. We're hoping that the money to support that would be convincing, and that if you have the institution on board to support, maybe you need to take a leave of absence or something. You asking whether we support the financial bit of that, or?
I guess that there's two ways to think about that question, because I mean, obviously this is a huge issue for so many curators, is how to build research time into the practice, into a very busy exhibition-hungry machine, right?
Right.
So there's the one question, which is salary relief part of what you think of as the natural course of a grant? And then the other piece of the question is, do you ask institutions to commit to, as an institution, rather than you asking the curator to take time out of their work in order to deepen a research practice? Do you ask the institution to commit to that deepened research practice as well?
We do, and because the grant goes to the institution to then give to the curator because we can't give to individuals. So that institution needs to be fully behind that project happening. The salary relief tends to be trickier because if you're on staff, you could be an independent curator with another institution, and then there might be a stipend that's available within that. But if you're on salary within the institution, we're not paying that salary. That might be something to look at within it, but essentially the institution does need to be on board and support that. And if it were to be an exhibition, then that would be what you're doing there anyway. So it should work out. That would just give you some more time to do it and resources to travel to investigate it.
And then for Paula and for Carrie, how does R&D money factor into your proposals, if at all, into what you fund and priorities for funding?
We have two types of exhibition R&D grants. One is for exhibitions that are organized by a U.S. institution but travel internationally, and they are called Internationally Collaborative Pre-Exhibition Convening Grants. And they basically, they're to take place about 18 months to 2 years before an exhibition opens. You bring together people from the international venue and the U.S. venue. It can be educators, it can be international scholars that wouldn't normally be at the table. That's often the case with American art. There aren't a lot of people working on it pre-1950. So it's a chance to bring people together either in one meeting or a series of meetings to enrich the catalog, to enrich the presentation, enrich the checklist. The other type is curatorial travel fellowships for international curators. And interestingly, we have also not had very many applicants. So maybe we should talk about why we don't have any applicants. But those tend to be for very specific exhibitions, and they need to see archives in the U.S.
We have a formal planning grant proposal that is part of our adjudication process across the center. Every program has a planning component to it, and it covers all the usual cost of R&D, travel, convening. We're interested in, we try to not have them too locked down. We are also interested in a sense of discovery within planning. So if you just want money to figure out how many crates you need and how big they have to be and how much it's going to cost to build them, we're not going to give you planning money for that. But if you are doing an exhibition, even for a single artist, and you really want to use the time to look deeply into that artist's work and realize that there is discovery within that process, that you don't know all the time exactly where you're going to end up. So we are interested in the planning thesis, the idea of the planning, and then who you're going to do it with, and what are you going to do, and then what do you hope to discover, even though you don't know what it is. So that's a planning process, and across the center they range from $25,000 to $75,000 grants. They're pretty big, but we also have discretionary money for small curatorial research projects, and they can be $5,000 or $10,000 grants that we talk to our curators. They come to us with an idea for research or for something they have in mind, and we usually look to figure out a way that it can align with one of our through lines, something that we're trying to do for the field and the community, and can we put it on our website? Is there something we can do in helping that organization? Is there some benefit we can reap, some knowledge we can share helping that curator in an organization? Is there some knowledge we can share? Because we really feel like everything we're doing in this kind of area, we really want to bring it back and try to share it in a more general way. So,
Other questions? I think Alex first and then Karen.
I have a kind of general question to the panel about timing. It's coming out of an experience I had. I had a small museum, and I'm the first curator in my particular field, so I've been founding a program. And I've been working on a large historical, but within contemporary group show since I started a couple of years ago, and I had a certain amount of pressure from the development department, my director, to apply for grants for the show before I felt I was ready, and I really had an argument and a solid checklist. And we applied to a couple of major foundations and didn't get them. And I knew why. It was because I wasn't ready. So I was wondering, in terms of
I think for IMLS, and I failed to mention that we also have a peer review process, and there are criteria that the reviewers are looking at, and those are in our guidelines. So we sort of give away the answers to the test. It makes writing the proposal easier. But I think they really, they will see if you're not ready, if you're not able to answer everything, and if you're not able to clearly say what you want to get out of this and what the outcomes are going to be. And maybe it also blends into the previous questions about planning. IMLS will fund planning. We'll fund anything but parties and construction and development, I think, provided you can make the case. And so if it's early in the process and there's certain things that you do know you have to do before you're ready for prime time, then those are okay activities too.
Yeah, we would encourage you to think about a planning proposal. If you're doing a major show and you don't have a checklist, our panel can't know what it is the exhibition is going to be. So it's really hard to adjudicate it or evaluate it in any way, in any comprehensive way. So we would say come back, try for planning, come back when you're really ready. And also, organizations that don't succeed in a project are not prohibited from reapplying with that project again for us. And I have seen organizations come back 3 times, taking the feedback from the panel every time and really making the project stronger and eventually get funded. So
Absolutely.
Timing is everything. And if you're looking for support, I mean, resources are so stretched, and everybody, even though we're fairly well funded, we still can't do everything we'd like to do. So come when you're really at your best. When you have the strongest case to make.
There is something to, if you're an institution that hasn't ever applied to our foundation before, sometimes that first application, even knowing it's going to go down in flames, it's good to put it out there.
Yeah.
Because that serves as an introduction to what you're doing, that it exists. I mean, if you can, if you have the time to do it, and sometimes that can be helpful towards your thought process as well in terms of defining the program or the exhibition, but it can be a nice way to introduce it rather than just a cold call or something, because then we have some familiarity with it.
Okay, and Karen?
This question is really for anyone on the panel. One of the things I find most challenging in the grant application process, as well as if you have a successful grant, the grant reporting process, is measuring the success of an exhibition. And so I'd love to hear some suggestions about tools that work, that can really quantify the success of an exhibition type of project. Visitor numbers, yes, but that doesn't really tell you what people got out of the exhibition. Visitor surveys, unless the questions are very carefully phrased, calibrated, it's also difficult to quantify the success of an exhibition. So I would love to hear some suggestions from the panel.
Yeah, I think there's lots of new research about learning outcomes from exhibits and ways of trying to get your hand around them, because numbers that come through the door aren't necessarily an outcome, but it is tricky and it's exciting to see what people are doing and whether they're having any success. I don't know, did Nina tell you about the story from the I think it was the Ontario Science Museum with the Going to Mars exhibit, where they had 2 turnstiles, one, because the exhibit was about what it would be like if you went to Mars. So there was 2 turnstiles. One was, I want to go to Mars, and the other one was, I don't want to go to Mars. And you chose which you entered, how you entered the exhibit. And you went through the exhibit, and at the end, I think you got to choose again which turnstile you went through. And so it counted it. So the question is, did you change your opinion by going through the exhibit that, wow, I really want to go to Mars, but oh God, no, I'll be 110. I won't ever see my kids. It'll be horrible. I have to pee in bags or whatever. So I mean, it was a very soft but creative way of determining what happened to people's opinions throughout the exhibit. And then I don't think it's totally unrelated to what might be able to happen in art museum art exhibits.
I think it also depends on who you're measuring for. Are you measuring for the museum? Is the museum trying to measure something? Or are you trying to measure for a particular funder? They sometimes have different interests. Some are more concerned about audience experience than others. So, yeah.
I would say success is measured in direct relationship to the goal of your project, the goals of your project. And if you can articulate what they are, then you have a way of knowing whether you were successful or not. And so that's the latest thinking that we're coming across with evaluation, you know, that you really need to be clear, even if your goal is some kind of discovery, you know, how are you going to know what, you know, how are you going to measure then your success vis-a-vis those goals? It makes it a little bit easier because you have something tangible to look at. So if your measure of success is to influence the field, then to figure out what that means in this project, and then to be able to evaluate whether you did that or not through whatever mechanisms you're going to use. It's such a hard thing, you know, and funders are very, you know, they can be capricious about outcomes and evaluation. They can want one thing one time and another. It's not easy.
We'd just like to know that it happened.
That's,
I mean, we're
Very easy.
essentially,
that's good.
because we're also supporting experimental work, so failure could be totally successful if the art, you know, I mean, if the artist pulled off what they said they were going to do,
Yeah.
and 3 people came, that doesn't matter as much to us. It's really, you've provided what you said you were going to do, which was an opportunity for the artist to take a risk to expand their practice. They did it. There you go. And we don't have any place for audience figures on our reporting forms at all, as far as I know. I should read them. But as long as the budget is there and you haven't spent too much on overhead and the project's actually happened and we got the catalog, then that's what we're looking for. So.
And you didn't quit.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is might be sort of an awkward question, but since the development people aren't here, I'll ask. What do you do, or how do you handle, or does it ever come up that you have multiple applications coming from the same institution? Because coming from a large institution, we're often told by the development department, you can't apply for that this year because the priorities are for something else has already been applied for, or the museum really wants to focus on this, and without going into details. But I'm just wondering, from your perspective, like, is that really the case, and or because you're encouraging us as curators to come to you directly to talk about our projects. So I'm just wondering, how do you handle that, and is it true that we'd be oversaturating you with applications if you get more than one from the same institution?
That's a great question, and one that IMLS is struggling with tremendously because, again, we have a finite amount of money. And at the end of the day, it's our director, at the instruction of the president, who gives out the grant money. And it's her job to say, I have to give money out to the nation of museums, and where does it go? But that said, we have not said you're limited to one application, either within a program or across programs. We have indeed funded an institution more than once in one fiscal year for 2 separate projects. We do get a little bit frustrated if institutions try to submit the same project in different places, because then we feel like we're spending our administrative monies to review it. We don't always catch it because we've got hundreds and we can't read them all before they go to review. So we're having multiple people review essentially the same thing in different buckets, and that's a little not right. So it is almost an institutional choice. I mean, you say, do we have a good chance? Are these 2 really strong things? Do we have a good chance, or do we want to set our priority this year? Because it's hard to say at the end of the day what the director will do. I mean, we give her the best ranked proposals.
We also will allow multiple applications, even in the same round, from an institution. It might be good to advise your development department or curate, whatever, your director, if you're going to go talk. But conversely, sometimes you can, talk to a program officer, get them kind of excited, and then you can go back and say, look, I think they're really interested. So.
Yeah, well, I'm not saying you have to go rogue with, talk to them.
No,
Talk to them.
I wasn't suggesting it. Just wondering.
I think there's a reason for development departments to exist, and but this is the thing. But what happens sometimes is that purpose is not what is driving what they're doing, right, in our institutions. So I speaking of relationship building, I think it's really important to go back, think about your relationship with the development office and how moving forward you can utilize them for their strengths, timelines. What are the outcomes that we should be saying? Are we following guidelines, reviewing proposals, and make them see that you are vital, right? And if they don't, that's a problem, because you've heard from how many panelists here that they want to talk to you, and that's true of any foundation in any field. They want to talk to the program people. The foundation people don't want to sit in a room with development officers. They should understand that. And if that's not the case, they don't understand that, then there needs to be some kind of professional development.
Well, that's what I'm getting. Sometimes there's some education needed because the turnover rate is often very high in development
It is.
departments. And so you know, you have to re-educate that program officer within your institution,
Yeah.
especially if you have a very niche field that's not contemporary, that's not in the mainstream, that they don't have a background knowledge to pitch.
Yeah.
So that's, I'm not trying to bad
No, and
development people, because I think they're very helpful, but it's just like, how do you work together and how do you build collaboration?
We directly tell the applicants that we won't just talk to their development people, that the development people have to come in with a program, the lead, whoever it is. A director's great if they have the time, if it's a small enough organization, but definitely the curator or the, whoever is the chief programmer for the project. And we just make it it's just the way it has to go. So.
I'm giving a talk on Thursday to an association of art museum development people in
Don't
Chicago.
tell them about this.
And I'd love to hear if you all have suggestions that I could, because I'm supposed to talk about relations with foundations, and maybe I'd be interested to hear what your complaints are.
Watch out.
Everybody, I know.
You're asking a group of curators to give you some complaints? Sorry. That was a joke. Okay, well, on that note, I would say that, as I mentioned before, a lot of this conference is going to be also interactive online, and we have recordings of every single session this year. So all of that should be uploaded and presented to the AAMC website very soon. But I encourage you to fill out the form that you'll have in the next, I think, 48 hours. That's an evaluation form, and actually I'll make sure to have a question specific to some feedback for this panel that maybe would be useful for Carrie in that realm as well. So with that, I also have maps for the gallery receptions, and so if you need a map to get down to Chelsea, let me know. I've got some. But I will finish with thanking Leanne and our panelists. I think that was exactly what we wanted to do. And thank you to all of you for hanging in there until the end. I'll see you next year.